Peter. Also known as Simon, Simon Peter, and Cephas, Peter was the leader of the 12 disciples. He came from the ancient fishing village of Bethsaida along the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The Bible often portrays Peter as gentle but firm and extremely loyal to Jesus, but he wasn't perfect. When Jesus was arrested, Peter was afraid for his life, so he disowned him to avoid persecution. As an uneducated man, Peter was untrained in Mosaic law and was a slow learner who repeatedly made mistakes. But when given the opportunity to prove himself, he proved that he was capable. When Jesus walked on water, Peter joined him. Peter witnessed numerous miracles, including the time Jesus brought a dead girl back to life. In what's known as the Great Fire of Rome, 2/3 of Rome burned down in 64 AD. The Emperor Nero blamed Christians and crucified Peter. He was crucified upside down because he felt unworthy of dying the same way as Jesus. James, son of Zebedee. Also known as James the Greater, James, son of Zebedee, was one of Jesus' main disciples and one of 2 apostles named James. The Bible recounts how he and his brother and fellow disciple John asked Jesus if they should call down fire from heaven on a town that refused to show them hospitality. In the book of Mark, James asked Jesus if he and John could sit on either side of his throne and promised to follow him into martyrdom. As the only disciple whose martyrdom is recorded in the Bible, James died by sword at the hands of King Herod, who most likely beheaded him. He's considered the first person to die for Jesus. According to tradition, James was a missionary to Spain and was buried there, but he died in Jerusalem during the very early days of the Christian Church, so there are some issues with this belief. Nevertheless, for centuries, Christians have traveled to his alleged burial place in northwestern Spain on an annual pilgrimage called the Camino de Santiago. Every year, around 300,000 people visit the shrine of St. James the Great in the city of Santiago de Compostela. John, son of Zebedee. John, son of Zebedee, was the 3rd member of Jesus' inner circle of disciples and the brother of James the Greater. He's one of several apostles who were fishermen before they were called to Jesus. John is best known for a few key events mentioned in the Bible, including when he took Jesus' mother, Mary, into his home and cared for her. When news broke that Jesus' tomb was empty, John and Peter ran there together. John arrived first, and the pair were mystified by the pile of linens left behind, unaware that Jesus would rise according to the scripture. According to tradition, John was exiled to the island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. He died in 98 AD from old age, unlike many, if not all, of the other disciples. Before John's death, Peter had asked Jesus what would happen to John, saying, "Lord, what about him?" Jesus replied by more or less telling Peter that it was none of his business, leading the disciples to believe that John wouldn't die. But they were wrong, and it is now thought that Jesus meant there were different plans for John's death than everyone else's. Andrew. Andrew was a fisherman and the first disciple that Jesus called to serve him. Although he wasn't one of the 3 main disciples, he was known as one of the disciples more closely attached to Jesus. Before that, Andrew was a disciple of Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist. Andrew brought Peter to Jesus and told him that Jesus is the Messiah, even though Peter typically gets all the credit for recognizing Jesus as the Messiah. This is just one example of how Andrew almost always came second to his brother in the scriptures. This was likely because he was either younger or considered less important than Peter. Andrew was crucified in 60 AD in the Greek city of Patras. According to the Acts of Andrew, he was bound to an X-shaped cross, known as a St. Andrew's cross, because, like Peter, he considered himself unworthy of dying the same way that Jesus died. He remained suspended for 3 days, preaching the entire time. Earlier texts describe the crucifix used in Andrew's martyrdom as a traditional cross. In both versions of the story, he was bound rather than nailed. Philip. The Apostle Philip is only mentioned a handful of times in the New Testament. He's one of 4 men named Philip who are discussed throughout the Bible. To make matters even more confusing, early Bible readers often got all these Philips confused with one another. Very little is known about Philip the Apostle. Like Peter and Andrew, he was from the coastal town of Bethsaida on the Sea of Galilee. The Bible describes some Greek men seeking Philip out because they want to see Jesus, suggesting that Philip may have spoken better Greek than his fellow disciples. He's best known for bringing Nathanael to Jesus. In the book of John, Jesus tests Philip by asking him where to buy bread for a crowd of 5,000 hungry people. Later in the scripture, Philip asks Jesus to show them God the Father. Jesus responds, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." There are varying accounts of Philip's death, which likely happened around 80 AD. One claims that he died from natural causes, while other records suggest that Philip was stoned, beheaded, or crucified upside down. Bartholomew. Not much is known about the Apostle Bartholomew other than his name. He may have gone by another name, and he's closely associated with Philip in the Bible, suggesting that the two had a relationship of some sort. Some believe that Bartholomew was also Nathanael. In the Gospel of John, there's an apostle named Nathanael who's closely associated with Philip, and Bartholomew isn't mentioned in John. But others disagree and think that Bartholomew and Nathanael were different people. Bartholomew was likely martyred like most of the other apostles, and there are a variety of claims about how he died. According to the most popular and gruesome version, he was flayed alive and then decapitated. Paintings depicting Bartholomew's death often show him cut up and wearing his skin or holding a flaying knife. Other accounts of Bartholomew's death suggest that he was beaten and crucified upside down, crucified, taken down while still alive, and then flayed and beheaded, beaten unconscious, and thrown into the sea, and that he was just beheaded. While the specifics surrounding Bartholomew's death are unclear due to the conflicting stories, it's clear that he didn't die from natural causes or from old age. However he passed from this world, it was likely horrible. Which version of this story had you heard or believed to be true? Tell me in the comments. Matthew. Also known as Levi, Matthew was a tax collector who collected money for Rome from fellow Jews. In 1st century Judaism, this was one of the most criticized and hated professions. It was seen as a form of betrayal that represented Rome's occupation of Israel. So when Jesus asked Matthew to be one of his disciples, it showed that God chooses all sorts of people to do his work, including people who were normally considered outsiders. Matthew is only mentioned 7 times in the Bible, yet he's one of the most well-known disciples. According to the Gospels, Jesus approached him at a tax collector's booth and asked Matthew to follow him. The two then ate dinner at Matthew's house with many tax collectors and sinners. Jesus did this not as a demonstration of poor character, but to show that even the people society considered irredeemable were accepted by God. The circumstances surrounding Matthew's death are largely a mystery. One account suggests that he died of old age, but it's more likely that he was martyred like most of his fellow disciples. There are various accounts of what may have happened to him, including stories about him being beheaded, stabbed, burned, or stoned. Thomas. Thomas the Apostle isn't mentioned much in the Bible, and the details of his life are conflicting and obscure. But he became well known for his skepticism during one particularly famous event that earned him the nickname Doubting Thomas. The Gospel of John describes how Thomas doubted Jesus' resurrection, stating to his fellow disciples, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Jesus appeared and offered to let Thomas touch his wounds like he said he needed to in order to believe that the resurrection was real. This story was the foundation of evidence-based faith and for the concept of people who have not seen and yet have believed. Thomas was martyred on July 3rd in 72 AD. According to tradition, he was speared to death in Mylapore, India. Unlike the accounts of most of the other disciples' deaths, there are only a few stories about how Thomas died. and they're all similar. Are you familiar with the Doubting Thomas story? And did you know its origin? Tell me in the comments, and while you're there, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. James, son of Alphaeus. In case you haven't noticed, James was a popular name during biblical times. The Apostle James, son of Alphaeus, is only mentioned in the 4 lists of the Apostles, meaning that only 2 things are known for sure about him: that his name was James, and that his father's name was Alphaeus. There are numerous speculations about him, but none of them can be proven as facts. To make matters even more confusing, while it's clear that James, son of Alphaeus, was a different person than his fellow apostle James, son of Zebedee, there are 2 other people named James in the Bible. One of them is Jesus' brother, also known as James the Just, and the other is known as James the Less, and it's unclear whether either of them are the same person as James, son of Alphaeus. Even the early church struggled with trying to figure this out. Because of all this confusion, it's hard to say how James, son of Alphaeus, died. Jesus' brother James met a violent end when he was pushed from a temple's pinnacle, beaten with a club, and then stoned to death. One account detailing the death of James, son of Alphaeus, claims that he was crucified during a preaching mission in Egypt. Another story says that he was stoned to death in Jerusalem. Regardless of how James the Apostle died, it's probably safe to say that he was martyred. Jude. The Apostle Jude is known by several names, including Jude of James, Judas of James, Thaddeus, Judas, Thaddeus, and Lebbeus. Some people believe that he was Jesus' brother, but there are no clear statements in the Bible about this being the case, so nobody can say for sure whether both Judes were the same person. It's hard to speculate about Jude the Apostle's life or death without considering it as a possibility, however. Jude the Apostle was definitely a different person than Judas Iscariot, and it's believed that he went by the nickname Thaddeus to distinguish himself from Judas, who wasn't exactly a well-liked figure of the church during this time. Tradition holds that Jude the Apostle was martyred alongside Simon the Zealot in what is now the city of Beirut in 65 AD. At the time, the region was part of the Roman province of Syria. Religious artwork often depicts Jude holding an axe, which symbolizes how he died. One account claims that his remains were transported from Beirut to Rome in 1665 and were placed in a crypt at St. Peter's Basilica, where his bones share a tomb with Simon the Zealot. Another story claims that Jude's remains were preserved at an Armenian monastery in Kyrgyzstan, and that they were kept there at least until the mid-15th century. An ossuary bearing the inscription Judas Thaddeus was found alongside several unmarked ossuaries in Israel's Jezreel Valley. The site was dated to no later than the 2nd century, indicating that it could be Jude's burial place. Simon the Zealot. Simon the Zealot's name only appears in the 4 lists of the Apostles. Nobody knows what his nickname, the Zealot, means. One possibility is that he was a member of a Jewish sect called the Zealots, who were a revolution-seeking group in search of a Messiah. Another is that he was zealous about the study of Mosaic law or for Jesus and his teachings. Some early mistranslations of the Bible confuse Simon with Jesus' brother and inaccurately refer to him as Simon the Canaanite. This led to the belief that Simon the Zealot was present during Jesus' first miracle when he turned water into wine. But it's now thought that this may not have been the case. According to tradition, Simon preached in Egypt, but almost nothing else is known about him, and there are conflicting stories about how he died. The earliest records are from centuries after he died, which makes it even harder to say with any confidence what most likely happened. During the 5th century, the Armenian historian Moses of Turin wrote that Simon was martyred in the kingdom of Iberia. A compilation of the stories of saints' lives, known as the Golden Legend, claims that Simon the Zealot was martyred in Persia in 65 AD. Ethiopian Christians have said that he was killed in a central region of Israel called Samaria. One account says that Simon was crucified in Britain in 61 AD. Another story claims that he was sawed in half, while Eastern tradition holds that he died of old age in the ancient city of Edessa. Judas Iscariot. The most famous, or perhaps infamous, apostle was Judas Iscariot. Even today, his name is synonymous with the word traitor. At one time, Judas was probably considered trustworthy. He was the designated treasurer for Jesus and the disciples. Yet the same scripture that describes his job also mentions how untrustworthy he was. Jesus told his disciples at the Last Supper that he knew one of them was going to betray him. He then turned to Judas and said, "What you are about to do it quickly." At the time, none of the other apostles picked up on what that meant, because they assumed Jesus was talking about something money-related. According to the Bible, Judas met with some priests and agreed to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He later approached Jesus while being followed by the armed mob who captured him and took him to be crucified. It is in this way that greed motivated Judas to do something that led to Jesus' death. He immediately regretted what he did, but his life was, in effect, ruined. According to the book of Matthew, Judas hanged himself. The Gospel of Luke describes how Judas used the money he received for betraying Jesus to buy a field, where he fell head first. According to the scripture, his body burst open and his intestines spilled out. It's not clear what this means, and both accounts were written after Judas's death, so it's possible that the writers got some of the details wrong. We often hear of the 12 apostles as a group, but it's fascinating learning more about each of them individually.
Lacus Curtius. Lacus Curtius was once believed by the Romans to be a gateway to hell, although it doesn't look much like a portal to the netherworld today. The once frightening supposed entrance to the underworld has now been paved over. There is nothing left to mark the place except a circular slab of stone. But in ancient times, there was a terrifying chasm here. The origins of this place are quite mysterious. As Rome was moving into the Republican period, Lacus Curtius was a place of great mystery and intrigue. Legend says that the hole opened by itself after the oracle foretold of Rome's inevitable fall. It was meant to be a passage to the underworld and a place for a sacrifice that could save the empire. A young soldier named Marcus Curtius offered himself in order to save Rome. He dressed fully in battle armor, got into his great steed, and rode his horse directly into the pit of doom. He died and was never seen again, but Rome was safe, at least for the time being. This is just one of the many legends surrounding the enormous pit. The truth is that the whole area was once a wild swamp, and the pit was probably just an ordinary sinkhole. It took on a myth of its own thanks to the superstitions of the Romans. Temple of Doom. A mysterious and terrifying Temple of Doom has been discovered at an ancient archaeological site in Turkey. Researchers believe the temple likely belonged to a group of cultists who had decorated the structure with human heads. The discovery was made inside the world's oldest temple, Göbekli Tepe, and it dates back 11,500 years. 3 skull fragments were found at a dig site here, each one of them showing evidence of mutilation after death. According to anthropologist Julia Gresky, each skull was found with deep incisions left by a knife. One even had a hole in it that looked as though it had been drilled. All these markings suggest a process called defleshing. This was when the flesh from a skull was scraped off using a primitive stone tool. There are a few different reasons the ancient people worshipping at this temple could have had a fascination with skulls. Rituals, ancestor worship, or the belief in some kind of mystical power associated with them are all possible. And though researchers have found only 3 of them, there were likely many more skulls to be found at the site long ago. The King's Grave. One of the biggest stone graves from the Nordic Bronze Age can be found in Sweden. It's in the southwestern part of the country and is a massive burial cairn. What makes the burial mound so impressive is its size. It's absolutely enormous at 75 meters in diameter. It was made around the year 1600 BC and stands out from other tombs in Europe because it's decorated with petroglyphs. There are strange images of animals, people, symbols, musical instruments, and even curious figures in robes dancing. As for its discovery, the mysterious Kivik King's Grave, as it's called, was a quarry for construction materials up until 1748. That was when a pair of farmers stumbled upon the tomb by accident. They explored it heavily in hopes of uncovering ancient treasure. The site was excavated properly in the 1930s, but by then had likely been pillaged pretty heavily and documented poorly. Even though it's called the King's Grave, we don't know who was buried inside the tomb. As it turned out, the remains of several teenagers were discovered inside. In the time since, researchers have opened the space to tourists. The ghost city of Kuldara. The ghost city of Kuldara was a prosperous village about 300 years ago in the deserts of India. According to local legend, the ruler of the state, an evil and hated man by the name of Salim Singh, wanted to marry the daughter of the village chief. However, the daughter wasn't interested. Angrily, Singh threatened that if the village didn't give the woman up, he would have them destroyed. Instead of giving in to his wishes, the people of the 85 surrounding villages disappeared, cursing Kuldara so that no one would settle there again as they left. And to this day, the village remains completely barren. No one has lived here in centuries. The locals claim that strange paranormal phenomena allegedly happens within its boundaries. However, the more historically accurate account of events would be that Salim Singh raised the taxes to such an extreme extent that the local villagers could no longer afford to stay there, and so the people migrated and left their city to become a ruin. Tomb of the Winged Demons. The Tomb of the Winged Demons in Tuscany is a strange and spooky archaeological site. The tomb gets its name from the sculptures of winged demons that watch over the niche where an unknown person was laid to rest around 2,300 years ago. On the pediment at the entrance is a huge winged sea demon called a Scylla, while inside 2 female demons and a pair of lions once stood guard outside. The tomb itself isn't that large, more like a cubic block carved straight out of the stone. The tomb was created by the ancient Etruscans before the Romans rose to power. These demons depicted here have nothing to do with Christianity, but were instead beings created by the Etruscans. If you ever go to Tuscany, remember to stop by and visit the tomb, and of course, tell me all about it. Big shout out to Niala Kuro and Ghosty1969. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. We wouldn't be here without you guys. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to subscribe for more videos like these. Mysterious dog burials. Archaeologists in England discovered a settlement from the Iron Age in a farmer's field in Polton. The settlement once consisted of a group of roundhouses made of earth and timber with thatched roofs. Over 5,000 artifacts have been uncovered here, including burials both human and animal. The strangest part by far have been the sacrificial dog burials. Inside one of the roundhouses was the home of the tribal chief, the person who presided over the entire settlement. Within his home, archaeologists came across all sorts of ritual deposits, including decorations made of antlers and the remains of 2 dogs. One was placed near the entrance and the other was buried in the center of the house. Each animal had been intentionally sacrificed, probably in exchange for prosperity and wealth. Iron Age communities often believed that by sacrificing creatures and burying them inside their homes, they would have great fortune. Sacrificing 2 important animals like dogs was typical of chiefs, who undoubtedly felt like they deserved to have the best luck of them all. City of the Dead. French archaeologists have uncovered a mysterious city of the dead over 1,000 years old. They found it in Corsica, a large island off the coast of France. It's a huge necropolis containing at least 40 tombs, with the bodies stored in giant jars that are normally found in North Africa. But because of the sheer number of civilizations that have ruled Corsica over the years, experts have no clue when these people were buried. They don't know when the City of the Dead first came about, though they believe it may have been 2,000 years ago with the rise of the Roman Empire. The necropolis was excavated in a sleepy fishing village on the coast. The town standing today was founded in the 18th century, but people have been living in the area for at least 6,000 years. The truly unique part of this great city of the dead is that the deceased were put into these huge jars. The remains of men, women, children, people of all sorts were found in these clay vessels. The archaeologists also found the remains of 40 villagers that had been buried behind a church about 1,400 years ago in the same area. Other archaeological evidence suggests these curious burials came from the days of the Romans. However, it also could have been the more mysterious Visigoths who built the necropolis. especially since they were considered more barbaric and would have had more unusual burial customs. The Actun Tunicil Muknal Cave. In Belize, the Actun Tunicil Muknal Cave is a dark, damp, and extremely spooky place. For the ancient Maya who lived here thousands of years ago, this cave was thought to be a physical entrance to the underworld, a place called Xibalba. When translated to English, Xibalba means place of fear. Xibalba was considered the otherworldly realm where spirits went when they died. Like many other ancient people, the Maya believed this world of the dead could be accessed through underground passages. The cave was first discovered in 1989, with archaeological research starting soon after in 1993. It's about 3 miles deep and has yielded over 1,400 artifacts. The Maya left behind pieces of pottery, tools, and one particularly fascinating relic called a monkey pot. A monkey pot is a simple pot, but with a monkey on its rim. It's one of only 4 such artifacts that have ever been found in Central America, making it very rare. Archaeologists have also found human remains here that showed evidence of being bound and tortured. Inside one of the chambers, researchers also exhumed remains of people who had been killed using obsidian blades. Archaeologists believe this was some kind of extremely violent ritual. This was a cave of great and terrible power, and the Maya here conducted these violent rituals to honor the gods of death. Hot springs from hell. Chinoike Jigoku is a hot spring in Japan, unique among the 9 hot springs here in Beppu City. Each one of the hot springs has an unusual color and composition, with each one different from most of the natural springs you find around the country. But Chinoiki Jigoku is by far the strangest, a small pool that's name translates to English as Bloody Hell Pond. The temperature of the pond is so hot it can be used for cooking. It reaches up to 174 degrees Fahrenheit. Despite its spooky name, the truth is that it's red boiling mud. But that didn't mean the Japanese couldn't use it for some pretty terrible practices. During the imperial period of Japan, this pond was used as both a punishment and torture. People were reportedly thrown into the pool and boiled to death. The Valley of No Return. The Valley of No Return in Brittany, France, maybe isn't as creepy as it is mystical. The place is also known as the domain of Morgan Le Fay, the half-sister of the legendary King Arthur and student in the magic of Merlin. It was here where Morgan turned the knight Guiomar and his lover to stone in a jealous fit of rage. She was so angry that the knight she loved had been found with another woman that she punished all men by casting a spell over the valley. Whenever someone walked through the valley, their soul became trapped for eternity, and they would have no notion of time or space. It was only when the brave knight Lancelot du Lac made good on his promise of love to the Queen Guinevere that the spell was broken and Morgan was forced to release her prisoners. These days, the valley isn't quite so evil. There are a few notable places like the Fairy's Mirror. It's right at the entrance of the valley and is said to be the border between the dream world and reality. Beast tunnels. In South America, researchers have been stumbling across some bizarre burrows, huge passageways dug through the forest as if by great machines. At first, researchers were left pretty confused. The tunnels are enormous, very neatly constructed, and over 10,000 years old. It almost appeared as though the tunnels had been dug out by some kind of advanced civilization with impressive technology. If true, the tunnels could have flipped what we know about human society on its head. But the truth is even stranger. These tunnels were not dug by alien technology. They didn't even have anything to do with humans. Researchers began to notice that there were claw marks gouged into the walls and the ceilings of the tunnels. It became clear that they were made by some kind of massive animal, an extinct species of giant with claws so big and powerful they could tunnel through the earth. It turns out these tunnels were dug by an extinct species of giant ground sloth. They are called paleo burrows, and up until recently, they were a huge mystery. Because the tunnels were first found in the 1930s, they were labeled as archaeological structures. It wasn't until geologist Amilcar Adami from the Brazilian Geological Survey started investigating the tunnels in 2010 that the truth came to light. Ground sloths, beasts bigger than the fabled Sasquatch, dug over 1,500 of these burrows underneath southeastern Brazil alone, some of them branching off like honeycombs under the ground for over 300 feet. Would you like to explore these tunnels? Let me know in the comments below. World War II Treasure Tunnel. Tomoyuki Yamashita was a general for the Japanese army in World War II. He was the one in charge of the invasion of Southeast Asia, victorious at the Battle of Singapore, and occupier of the Philippines. He was ultimately tried for war crimes and found guilty, but before his death, he had allegedly stashed a treasure somewhere underground in the Philippines, in a cave or a tunnel. Treasure hunters have been looking for the spoils of war for years. One of these eager hunters is John Casey, who recently went to the Philippines in search of Yamashita's lost gold. He was looking for a mountain where it was said Japanese soldiers were witnessed carrying mysterious wooden crates up into the shadows and hiding them somewhere. When John went up the mountain, he discovered a camouflage tunnel. But the tunnel was too unstable for anyone to enter. It could have collapsed at any moment. John and his team had no choice but to send in a remotely controlled robot. Sadly, John didn't find any treasure. What he did find was evidence that the Japanese had been using prisoners of war to carve a system of tunnels into the side of a mountain. They found old tools from World War II, chisel marks on the walls, and a heap of debris blocking the robot from going any further. There could be billions of dollars in gold deeper inside the tunnels, but John simply didn't have the resources to dig out the entire mountain. Do you think he should try to keep going? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The tunnel under the Pyramid of the Moon. Underneath the Pyramid of the Moon in the ancient capital of Teotihuacan, archaeologists stumbled upon a piece of the underworld. At least that's the way the Aztecs might have seen it. For those unfamiliar with Teotihuacan, located nearby modern Mexico City, here's a quick bit of background. The archaeological site was occupied by the Aztecs, but they weren't the ones who built it. It was an ancient and unknown society of people who built this place, but the Aztecs came along and made it their own. The Pyramid of the Moon is the second largest structure inside the ancient city. It was only recently that a tunnel was found underneath it, leading from the central square to directly under its bulk. But here's the thing, nobody has been able to go inside the tunnel just yet. The discovery was only made by electrical resistivity tomography. This is a method that creates subterranean images using high-tech scanning equipment. Researchers with Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History were scanning the entire site as part of a conservation effort when they accidentally found the tunnel. Here's another thing about the pyramid. It was almost certainly used for human sacrifice and other Aztec rituals. The tunnel is a little more mysterious than that, though, since nobody's been able to go inside it. We don't know if it's full of human bones or strange artifacts, but it may have been used by the Aztecs as a kind of passage into the underworld, where they took victims to be sacrificed to make them feel as though they were already entering the land of the dead. In any case, it's all pretty spooky. Creepy creatures. In a tunnel underneath the sea, an eyeless crustacean has been found. It's a creepy sea creature that's not much bigger than a worm. It was found in the Tunnel de la Atlántida, the longest submarine lava tube in the Canary Islands, located off the western coast of North Africa. The tube is about 5,000 feet long and formed over 20,000 years ago when the Monte Corona volcano erupted. Molten rock flowed across the land, sizzled into the ocean, and formed an almost perfectly circular tube. Then the tube became home to its unique host of creatures. The international team of researchers not only identified this new and hideous crustacean, but also two previously unknown species of worms. The crustacean is less than 1 inch long and belongs to a specific class of crustaceans called Remipedia that only live in cave systems. The creature has been perfectly adapted to live life in a dark and empty cave. It has ridiculously long antennae sprouting from its head, no eyes because it doesn't need to see, and its body is covered in sensory hairs. What this means is that the critter can feel its way as it moves along the walls of the tunnel, nabbing food wherever it sees an opportunity. The Bosnian Pyramid Valley and the Ravni Tunnels. The Bosnian Pyramid Complex is one of the most controversial archaeological sites in all of Europe. The biggest issue is that it's not technically an archaeological site. The Bosnian Pyramid is a really large natural hill in central Bosnia that looks strikingly like a pyramid. It has 4 almost perfectly congruent sides and looks just like a pyramid covered over with grass. Yet there has been no actual evidence that ancient people built it. All evidence points to it being a natural formation of earth and vegetation. But it's still a pretty fascinating place. There's even a mysterious tunnel network that was allegedly discovered in 2006 by a Bosnian businessman. It's come to be known as the Ravni Tunnels, and it's a massive labyrinth that goes about 3,000 feet into the earth. In 2011, a small sandstone rock was pulled out of the tunnel, found to have been carved in random shapes by someone using a primitive tool. A sharpened rock or something simple was used to create geometric figures on this rounded piece of sandstone. It's pretty fascinating, and people have a lot of different theories as to who made it. Some say it has something to do with the pyramids, while others say it was carved to look like the Star of David. However, sensible archaeologists believe it was left behind by Neolithic people living in the tunnels tens of thousands of years ago. The Tonka Raren tunnels. In northern Kyushu, Japan, there is a mysterious set of tunnels carved into the hills. They are called the Tonka Raren tunnels, and they are so narrow that only a small child or tiny adult would be able to get through them. Whoever carved these tunnels with their bare hands didn't have a problem with claustrophobia. The tunnels run for roughly 1,460 feet down into the body of the mountain, with some only about a foot off the ground and others nearly 13 feet tall. What's truly incredible is that the network of tunnels is a complete mystery. They were originally discovered in the 1970s, clearly carved using primitive tools. Yet nobody knows who carved the hollow passages, what they were used for, or even when they were first made. There have been speculations. Some say the tunnels are connected to the ancient kingdom of Yamataikoku, the Japanese equivalent of King Arthur's court. Others, specifically archaeologists and scientists, believe the tunnels were carved sometime in the 5th century AD, or about 1,500 years ago. They may have been used in shamanistic rituals, but nobody knows for sure. It's extra bizarre because there are no myths or legends attached to the tunnels. Nothing that can even point curious historians in the right direction. What would you do if you discovered a mysterious tunnel? Would you report it or explore it for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Big shout out to Randy Rosas and Lisa Schreiber. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about amazing discoveries. The Tunnel of the Templars. There is a mysterious underground passageway underneath the city of Acre in Israel, originally hollowed out by the Knights Templar. The tunnel was made during the reign of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and was used as a strategic connection between the Templars' palace and the port. It was in case they needed to flee the city or return to their sanctuary in secret. The city of Acre fell in the 13th century, and the Templars' tunnel was lost to history. It was only a few decades ago, in 1994, that the tunnel was discovered by a woman dealing with a blocked sewage pipe underneath her house. For 700 years, the tunnel had been sealed underneath the streets of Jerusalem, integrated with the sewage system. Archaeologists followed the tunnel from one end to the other. The western end is at the place where the great Templar fortress once stood, although it's no longer in existence. The other side comes out at the southeastern part of the city, which was once a major anchorage of the city's port. But the ancient port structures have also been lost. There was probably a lot that went on here that we just don't know much about. The Byzantine shipping fleet. The recent construction of an undersea rail tunnel to connect the Asian side of Istanbul with the European side of Istanbul was halted due to archaeological reasons. Workers came across clay pots and ancient artifacts inside the tunnel underneath the Bosporus Strait. The sheer number of artifacts is so baffling that the project to create this subsea rail system was delayed for nearly a decade. 35,000 artifacts were taken out of the tunnel, including pieces of burial structures, discarded animal bones, and ancient coins. Archaeologists also found the remains of 37 ships, making it the largest collection of shipwrecks in one place. Some of them are cargo vessels, some were once powerful military galleys that belonged to the Byzantine Navy. It's all quite incredible, and was only made possible because of this tunnel leading from one part of Istanbul to the other. How did all this stuff get underwater? Archaeologists believe they accidentally came across the lost legendary port of Theodosius. It must have sunk into the strait thousands of years ago. Rare Japanese swords. A pair of very rare and incredibly unique swords were discovered inside of an underground tunnel tomb in southern Japan. The swords date back about 1,500 years. One of them has proven to be the longest sword ever discovered inside a Japanese tomb. The other sword was found with its hilt still largely intact, covered in the decorative skin of a stingray. That makes it the oldest object found in East Asia decorated in stingray skin. When it comes to lost legendary weapons, it doesn't get much more amazing than this. The swords were discovered alongside a pair of skeletal remains, along with more weapons, piles of armor, and horse harnesses. All of this stuff was uncovered inside of a tunnel tomb from the 6th century AD. What's a tunnel tomb, you ask? It was a type of burial practiced in the Kofun period of Japan, from 250 to 538 AD. The Japanese would line an underground chamber with stone, then create a subterranean tunnel to reach the tomb through the bottom of a great earth mound. Although these tombs were fairly simple, the chambers have almost always boasted a huge trove of treasure. The people buried inside the tombs were the most important people of society, and they were buried with the most precious treasures that they'd adored in life. Take, for example, these two amazing swords. What treasure would you like to be buried with? Let me know in the comments. Tunnels under Castle Olshen. Archaeologists in Poland have discovered a cave and mysterious network of tunnels underneath one of the country's most infamous castles. I'm talking about Castle Olshen, the ruined one built in the 14th century near Krakow. The castle once protected the entire southern border of the Kingdom of Poland, part of a system of fortifications known as the Trail of Eagles' Nests. Each fortification was in sight of the next, and they could raise the alarm if any invaders tried to pass across the border. That's why the fortresses here were built on huge cliffs and ridges. But alas, the wall of fortifications only worked for so long. The castle was invaded several different times before the 15th century, and in 1655 was taken by the Swedes. In 1722, it was mostly demolished, and its bricks were used to build a local church. However, there is still plenty of mystery left in this old place. While archaeologists were excavating the lower part of the castle to look for artifacts, they realized something was hiding beneath their feet. They discovered a massive void underneath the castle, along with fissures and tunnels leading away from the main cavern. Unfortunately, they haven't been able to actually dig into the cave. They've simply identified the subterranean network and are now waiting for a team of cavers to go exploring. One theory is that the tunnels could lead to the nearby Jasna Gora monastery and may have been used for evacuating precious religious treasures during sieges. Thanks for watching! Which of these bizarre tunnel discoveries from the ancient world surprised you the most? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. See you next time for more amazing archaeology. Bye!